Good morning, George Hepworth, Grover Park Consulting. Let's build Mike's mobile library. Today I'm going to deliver the long-delayed session on working with complex SharePoint fields. In other words, using lookup fields in SharePoint lists. In previous videos we have edged right up to this topic and backed away as we worked through the patch command to edit existing records and add new records to our underlying fields. Today I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into the complex SharePoint fields or lookup fields and explain the mechanism we had to use to make them work. Before we examine the save process in our PowerApps application and the way the lookup field works and the patch command works there, I wanted to show you, or to refresh your memory here, of what we're dealing with. And this is the complex column in a SharePoint list. The one we're working with is the genre ID column in the publications table. The genre ID column is actually a lookup field. Type of information in this column is lookup. What that means is that instead of storing a single value, it actually stores a record internally in the table. The record is stored in the column called genre ID. The record which gets stored in that column as a complex column type in the publications table is the record in publications genre, which corresponds to this primary key field. In other words, publication genre ID value is stored there along with the rest of that record. This allows us to link one record in the publication genre table to a record in the publications table. Why would we do that? We do that because we want to enforce referential integrity. In the SharePoint world, it's referred to as enforce relationship behavior, and in practice it is essentially the same thing. Where in a relational database application, we create foreign and primary keys and enforce referential integrity on the relationship between them. Here, we have to rely on this mechanism which stores a specific record in the lookup field in the table to uniquely link those two tables, and then we apply this property of enforcing relationship behavior on that field in order to ensure that the records are valid. I always check restrict delete rather than cascade delete, because cascade delete runs the risk of accidentally orphaning certain records. I won't dive into that now because that's not where we're at in this discussion. But that's how we get these complex fields. We have a lookup field which stores a record, the record being the corresponding record from the lookup table with the primary key field, the publication genre ID field, and any additional fields that we want to make visible or make available directly in that linked table. But the key thing is that it is actually that entire record represented by that specific ID value that gets stored. So with that, we're ready to move on to our next step. Actually, as I did the research to confirm what I had previously discovered and try to fill in the gaps in my understanding, I ran across this blog post. It's on Mark D. Anderson's blog, and here's the URL to that blog and this specific post. I will make these available in the comments section for this particular video. To my surprise, I read this comment. Matt Devaney listed his top 10 PowerApps tips from 2020. So this is now almost a year old. Number 8 on that list pointed out that sometime in mid-2020, which is now more than a year old, the OData type was no longer required. at least for lookup and person or group columns. So there it is. I had been under the impression from previous research that it was a required part of that section of a patch command, but as it turns out, that is no longer required, and I can get by without it. But let's continue on to explore what these are all about. You still need to know which properties to pass for these column types, but you don't need to include the OData type property itself. So in the examples that he provided in his article, he commented out the OData type properties for these two column types. It doesn't hurt to pass them, but they are no longer needed, and that confirms what I had discovered. I was passing them, but I didn't really need to, but it didn't hurt to pass them. This is, again, the link to his blog, and then the link to Matthew Devaney's blog, where he explains all of this as well. And I'll post both of these links again, as I say, in the comments. More specifically, what we need to really understand in order to work with the patch command on lookup fields is that we're going to use this structure, this syntax. We include the name of the column, or in our mobile library application, that would be, say, genre type or publisher ID. I had been including the OData reference, which, as we just learned, is no longer required, so you can comment that out, and I will do that when I dive back into the app itself. The two values that are required are the ID, which is the lookup ID. That's the value you need to look up the value you're going to use, and the value itself, which is the lookup value. So when we go back in and look at the SharePoint lists and the patch command we're using to either add them or update them, we'll see that same structure. We need to include in the curly brackets the ID value and, the ID and the value of that field. Here are some additional resources that deal with this concept of updating lookup fields using the patch command. I will copy these and place them into the comments below. And with that, I think we're ready to dive back into our application and see how this plays out in real life. We're back now in the PowerApps development area in my Office 365 account. And we're going to take advantage of what we just learned about using the patch command to update complex fields or lookup fields in SharePoint lists by modifying the code in our development copy. Before I actually dive into that, I had an idea that I wanted to implement here. The reason I have the options screen is to provide a place where I can set up labels and back and fill colors and so on that I will use later throughout the app. And I thought that would be a good place to put this pattern that we just learned from reading that blog article. So I'm going to place a control on this option screen, and I'm going to paste into that control this pattern. Now it didn't copy paste exactly, so I'm going to have to do a little bit of modification. Bear with me for just a second as I do that. Now I have this set up, and if I need to create an additional element in a patch command to update a lookup column, I don't have to leave my app to go find the correct syntax. I can just look at my options screen and copy it off here. And again, the name of the column, which is a lookup column, the optional OData type property, the two values that need to be updated, the ID, and the value associated with that ID. And we can copy this pattern, as I say, anywhere we need to use it in a patch command in any future screen. So we'll save it. We always save. Go back to the publication, and we're ready to modify this application to take advantage of the fact that we now understand a little bit better how lookup fields need to be defined for the patch command. I'm going to go into the on start action. And we'll find that variable that we set. And remember, I set the variable for var data so that I wouldn't have to remember that syntax or copy it anywhere. And I'm going to just completely comment it out. It's no longer a valid variable. Now you'll notice that immediately creates errors. That's because this variable is no longer available, and everywhere where I've used it is now going to create an error. And that, in effect, is a way to help me track down every place where I've used it and correct it. So we've got that set up. I'm going to go ahead and run onStart again. Actually, I should rename this while I'm here. So I know what it's for. And now we will go to the screen where we are editing our patch commands. Now, this tells me that there are errors and I can track them down, but I know from previous sessions where they're going to be. So let's start here under the save icon. Expand it, and we can see right there is the first. Let's go double check, make sure I haven't missed any. I had already, in testing for this particular session, modified it here. Here's the second one. Remove it, comment it out. There's another one. We'll comment it out. As I go through, note that I called out the case sensitivity of these two, the ID and the value. ID and value. Comment out OData. Slide down. There's another one. This upper portion is the part where we edit existing records. This portion of the patch, or the conditional, is the patch command where we add new records. And again, just commenting these out. The red squiggle indicates wherever I have an error, making it easy to spot them. Slide down on through. We should have picked up everything. No more red squiggles. We're good. And that actually cleared our errors. So that's really the only places where we have to make that change. I'm just going to double check myself by looking at this one. I don't think we have to do it here. No red squiggles. Okay, we're good there. So now, when I update an existing record or add a new record, I'm going to be able to do it using the patch command without actually having to include that OData property. One more time, just to confirm what we looked at. Each of these values is set with the curly bracket, the ID value that we need to locate and update, and the value that we need to update it to. Let's finally look at how we set these variables, because that's an important part of how this works. We're ready to look at the process by which we update the 4 lookup fields in our table using the drop-down on our form and the patch command in our save routine. I'm going to show you in depth only the media condition drop-down, because the other 3, the genre, publisher, and media type, are exactly the same, and if you understand how this one works, you can also use that same approach to up to the other 3. So let's concentrate on media condition. Now, just to refresh, we have a form that is called form publication. And the data source for that form is the publication table. In Access terms, we think of this as the bound table being publication and the form being the interface through which we interact with. Similar concept, slightly different terminology I try to remember to use the the PowerApps specific terminology, but I often fall back onto the access terminology with which I'm most familiar, and I refer to it as the bound property as opposed to the data source. Each of our fields in the table is exposed through what is called a data card. And you can see it's called a card. And the card has a data field. In other words, this is the field in the table to which this particular card is, again, using the access term bound. This is the field in the table from which this control draws its records. In this case, it's the media condition ID, which we know is a lookup field, to a lookup table. And we expose those records through the drop-down, because the drop-down allows us to bring in the records from that lookup table. The data field and the default value is the media condition ID of the selected item. Let's talk about that really quickly. This item, again, refers to the record, which we are currently focused on in this form. If we're adding a new record, this item will be blank until we save it. If it's an existing record that we're editing, that record will be identified by the selection of it in the gallery and the loading of this screen with this form on it. The particular field or property within that record that we want to associate with this data card is the media condition ID. So whatever the default value, the default value is whatever is existing in that record for an existing record, or whatever we want to use as the default when we create new records. Now let's look at the drop-down in that card. The items which are listed in that drop-down, and this would correspond to the row source in the Access world, is, again, as I just said, the lookup table called media condition. We're not just going to link to it, we're going to manipulate it slightly by sorting it in a specific order. So we use the sort by columns command, and we sort the records in this table on the field called sort order. Let's go look at that table directly and see. I keep calling them tables, they're SharePoint lists. Well, let's look at that SharePoint list, which is the media condition list. Edit the data. And you can see here why we're using sort order. If I try to sort on the primary key field, which is media condition ID, it goes smallest to largest, and I get mint, excellent, very good, fair, and then good. That's because the order in which I entered them and they were given primary key values. If I sort alphabetically, then I get a different sort order: excellent, fair, good, mint, poor, trashed, and very good. Again, not what we want to see in our drop-down. So in order to present the values to the user in the sequence I want, I have to add a third column, sort order, and use that to sort the records: mint, excellent, and we're descending in quality here: good, very good, fair, poor, and trashed. So that's the reason we use the sort order column as our sorting in the drop-down. Let's look now at the way we implement the variable that we use in our save command to either add a new record or save the changes to a record. Whenever I change a record, whenever I change a value in the media condition drop-down, we set the variable called var condition to whatever value was selected. So that means that anytime I change it, we're changing not the record itself, but the variable which reflects which record was selected. What happens though if I simply tab onto this control or click onto it and it's already set to the value I want, so I don't change it? For example, I'm adding a new book and it's in mint condition, so even though it doesn't need to be changed because mint is going to be showing, I still need to set the value of that variable. So I also use the onSelect property to set the condition variable to the value of whatever is selected in there. That ensures me that I've got a valid variable value for my save. Okay, I think we're ready to run through a practice run here. We're going to add a new publication and then edit some of the fields about that publication. But before I do that, I want to show you something that is available in the interface for PowerApps, which I don't believe we've talked about before, and we will use this really quickly to establish a baseline. Under the View option on the menu, we have variables, and what this allows us to do is see the current value of all variables set within that application. So for example, if I scroll down here, the ones that we're looking at here, condition, you can see where it's set originally and all the places where it's changed, the code that makes those changes. The same would be true for media type, all the places where it's set or used. At this point, we can see that it is a record, but it has no value set. There's our record limit, which establishes the number of records we're going to bring in by default under the delegation limitation, 2000, and so on. Some of these are already set. You can see there's a record there. Others are not. The ones that we're working with here, publisher ID, media type, genre, and so on, are not yet set. Let's play the application and add a new publication. At this point, remember, our variables are not set for the 4 lookups that we're interested in. I'm going to select the Add option, the Add button, the Add icon, whatever you choose to call it. That sends us to a blank screen where we're able to add a new record. The form on this screen is in Add mode. So the publication title that I selected here is Baroka's Brain. It's a single volume, and I call it BB and then CS1 because it's the first book from Carl Sagan that I have entered. The publication date was 1974. It has 347 pages. It is Popular Science, I believe, is the closest. It defaulted to excellent condition. I'm looking at this cover. It's very good, maybe not excellent. So we'll change it. Remember, as soon as I select that control, it changes the variable for condition to whatever the default is. So I'm going to actually stop. I'm going to stop and show you when we save that record, the value that is currently set We have to skip from this section down to the add section. We know it's the add section because of the defaults. And we need to find the media condition. It's a record and it has the value of excellent. So even though I only touched it, I did not change it, the onSelect property or action set the value of that variable. Media, genre, there it is, I'm sorry, var genre. Please show me that. And it is popular science. So let's resume editing it. So I'm going to say this one is now very good, not excellent. And by changing it, let's go back in again. And we can see that the variable for media condition has been changed to very good by the on change action of that drop down. So it was originally set simply by touching it with the onSelect, and it was changed by using the onChange property. And we're looking at our default, which is McGraw-Hill. I'm going to play it again. I'm going to update this, which is actually Random House. And it is a book. So if I save this, now my code will run, save all the values that we've entered, and navigate back to the main publication screen, and I can filter Broca's Brain, and we have Popular Science, very good, Random House. I overlooked adding addition and printing. So now we can edit. I'm going to hit the edit icon. When I click on the pencil to edit, I come back, and as you can see, the values that we've previously entered are brought back into the edit version of the screen. And we can change any of the fields that we want to. They're all highlighted or outlined with the solid line that indicates they're editable. The first one I noticed here, I didn't call this out before, but I put these initials in the wrong order. It's Carl Sagan. Popular Science is correct. Edition, I have to refer back to my title page and get the edition. And this will be the Random House hardcover edition. Excuse me. And I believe the one that I have is from the first printing. Let me verify that. Yes, first printing. Okay, so now we can save our edits, and they will reflect back into the gallery, where we can see that is now the edition updated, the printing updated. We still don't have an image for it, but that will come in a later step. Okay, I think that's plenty now. We've gone a little bit longer in this session than I had anticipated, and we've covered a lot of ground, and there's still more to cover. I want to take an even deeper look at the variables that we're using, particularly with regard to the defaults, and the way I had to set the defaults for those values, and that by itself I think is enough information for another whole session. So we'll call it a day for now, wrap it up. As always, if you have any questions or comments, please use the comment section on the video to give me that information. Hit the subscribe button to subscribe to my channel, and of course the like button to indicate that you like what you've seen. I'll see you next time. Thank you.